Hello, welcome to Light from Above. My name is David Kenney. I'm the preacher for the Church of Christ in Wadsworth, Ohio. Glad you can watch the program with us today. Today we're talking about when Jesus was asking certain questions. And Jesus is obviously a very interesting individual, but you also want to keep in mind he's deity. He already knows the answer to every question. So it's very interesting about when he asks questions. And this is the subject of our study. And one of the questions we're going to look at today is really meant to generate thought for us to think. Jesus asked questions, and one of the reasons that he asked questions was to get people to think. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at one of the questions that Jesus asked and try to think about it some. The question is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? Taken from Matthew 6:25 and then Luke 12:22 through 23. And one of the things that's interesting about Jesus that sometimes people point out, or maybe sometimes people don't think about, is Jesus was not a materially wealthy individual. At least there's no evidence of that in the Bible. Matter of fact, if you look in Matthew 8:20, it says, "Foxes have holes." This is Jesus speaking. "Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Now, have you ever given any serious thought to the impact that Jesus has made in relationship to the material possessions that he had? Now, obviously, he's divine. He's all-powerful. I mean, he performed miracles and all that. But I want us to really focus in on this idea. Jesus didn't have a lot of the material things that we often associate with greatness. And yet, look at what Jesus accomplished in comparison to that. Now, the question, it's actually a question and a statement, but it occurs in two different places, and we'll show you this harmonization of the Gospels here, and it has the two places that it occurs. One is 28 AD. This is probably the more familiar occurrence of it. It's the Sermon on the Mount just outside of Capernaum. That's in Matthew 6:25. And then a year later, in 29 AD, he's preaching again. This is somewhere, believed, probably outside of Judea somewhere. This is in Luke chapter 12:22 through 23. According to this harmonization, Jesus will pass away at 30 AD. So we're getting very close to the end of his life. So it's important that we keep in mind that Jesus uses these concepts about life and food and body and clothing. He uses them on two different occasions. This recorded. He may have done it more than that. We're not totally sure. But let's take a look at these two texts in Matthew chapter 6:25 and also Luke 12:22 through 23. The account there in Matthew says, "Therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing?" Now, in the account in Luke here, notice that it's not a question. It's a statement. He's just telling them this is the way that it is. And so there is no open debate here on this. He said, then he said to his disciples, "Therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, nor about the body, what you will put on. Life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing." Now, it's interesting, when you start looking at these passages and start thinking about it, Jesus, in the Luke account, you go and look at it and you read above it or before it, and Jesus is being approached about settling a dispute on an estate. Apparently two brothers, maybe their father passed away, and one of the brothers dissatisfied with the settlement of that estate, and it appeals to Jesus, say, "Hey, tell him to settle this with me." And Jesus refused to get involved with that. One of the things that I've been reminded about, when a loved one passes away and they have an estate, you would think that the grief of the situation would be enough. But sometimes what happens is emotions are so charged during that period of time that when you try to settle that estate, when you basically take someone's goods, the things that you have memories attached to, when family all comes together to this person's residence or place, and then all of a sudden you're taking the things out and you're dividing them, that is a very emotional, gut-wrenching type of process. I've seen it. I've seen my father and his brothers go through it. We have had to go through it with the passing of my father, and it's not an easy thing to do. But we need to be reminded that covetousness is something that we need to be on guard against. And that doesn't necessarily mean that people that have, these types of supercharged emotions under these events are covetous. But we need to be aware of covetousness. Matter of fact, in Luke 12:15, Jesus said, "Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses." Now, Jesus is pointing out two basic views, the material and the spiritual, the man's view and God's view. Matter of fact, the fourfold gospel makes this statement about it. It says, "He," referring to Jesus, "now warns against a double mind as to the comparative value of the benefits to be derived from the service of God or the service of mammon." Mammon is money or riches. Mammon can only supply food, but God gives the life. Mammon can only furnish clothing, but God gives the body. By single-mindedness, we can find peace, for God is to be relied upon. By double-mindedness, we fall to worry, for mammon may fail to supply those things to which we feel we need. And it's a challenging thing to not be, we're in a material world, physical world. And so this is something that Jesus warns about, and he's not the only one to warn about covetousness. Some people say, oh, you know what, only the super rich have to worry about covetousness, but that's not true. That's just not true. We can all fall prey to the sin of covetousness. What does covetous mean? Covetous means to want more. That's what it means. It's the Greek word polexia. And also Paul, the Apostle Paul, wrote to the church, the Christians in Ephesus, and he warned them about it. He said, "But fornication and all uncleanness and covetousness, let it not even be named among you, as is fitting for saints." Now he's warning Christians not to be covetous. Now, warnings aren't given unless there's a possibility of falling prey to it. And so Paul's warning them. He also warned the Colossians about it. He says, "Therefore put to death your members which are on the earth, fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desires, and covetousness, which is idolatry." Now that's a real sobering thought. Covetousness, which is idolatry. On our money, we have "in God we trust." Sometimes maybe we should just take God's name off of it and just put "this," "in this we trust," the money. Hopefully there's enough people with enough sense to know better. But we are very much a materialistic, driven kind of society. Now, while Matthew's account shows the question to be rhetorical, Luke is a statement of fact. And so it's definitely something we need to be mindful of, that we live in a physical, temporal world. And so, we have this kind of dynamic going on that we have to be aware of. And it's interesting in the passage here, and both of these passages talks about "do not worry." Now that is extremely challenging, to worry, excessive worry. But he doesn't say don't worry excessively about it. He says do not worry. You ever given thought about worry, the idea of it, how counterproductive worry really is? Now, I know it's easy for me to say this, and I struggle with it too. Worry is something that we all struggle with. But just think about it for a moment. Worry, it's unnecessary. And what does it accomplish? God's going to provide. You don't need to waste your time worrying about it. Worry is unavailing because it doesn't accomplish anything. It doesn't help us. I mean, how many times have we sat up all night worrying about something, and it kept us up all night. And I guess some people equate worrying with caring, but worrying robs us of our peace of mind. We can't change anything by our worry, but yet people are consumed by it. Worry is inappropriate because Christians are told to cast their cares upon Him, upon God. You see, worry is something that Jesus rightfully warned us not to be involved in. In my father's study, he had a little, I think it's wood, a little wooden sign. And on that, there was painted on there, "Worry ends where faith begins." You want the cure for worry? The cure for worry is faith. Faith. You ever thought about worrying about material things, worrying about the things that Jesus tells us not to worry about? You ever thought of it from the standpoint that maybe God views that as a lack of our faith when we worry about it? They don't really trust me. They don't really rely upon me. They don't really believe in me. They really don't have faith that I'm going to do what I said I was going to do. Well, that's real challenging. That's very challenging. One of the things that's interesting, I was doing a little bit of research about poverty. We are very materially blessed in our country. And I'm not just talking again about the 2% versus the 98% or the whatever percentage. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about everybody in our country, in this nation, in comparison to the world. Sometimes I wonder if we even have a clear picture of that. I was looking at the World Bank, and they had some statistics from 2012. It said 12.7% of the world's population lives at or below $1.90 a day. $1.90, less than $2 a day in 2012. And you might think, how many people is that? Well, they give you that. They say this means that in 2012, 896 million people live on less than $1.90 a day. Now, we hear a lot about poverty. We hear a lot about it on the news and all that, and of course election cycles, that comes up and all that. But you may not realize that poverty is actually declined in the world. Now, I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, and I'm not saying that it's solved. But it's interesting, I read this, it says more than 8 in 10 Americans, 84%, are unaware global poverty has decreased by more than half in the past 30 years. More than 2/3, 67%, say they thought global poverty was on the rise over the past 3 decades. And that's from an organization called Compassion.com. So sometimes our perceptions of things are off on more ways than one. But even the poor in our country, compared to that, really? I mean, let's just, we can always look at somebody else and say, I want what they have. That's covetousness. That's covetousness. If you're a middle class person and you want what someone else has and that's covetousness. If you're a poor person looking at a middle class person, looking at a rich person, and doing this, that's covetousness. That's just what it is when greed motivates us like that. Well, it's interesting, I came across some statistics on U.S. poverty. It says the government's own data shows that actual living conditions of the more than 45 million people who are deemed poor by the Census Bureau differ greatly from popular conceptions of poverty. Now, I gave you the world population of it, world's measures of poverty. But here's what it said about ours. 80% of poor households have air conditioning. By contrast, at the beginning of the war on poverty, only 12% of the entire U.S. population enjoyed air conditioning. Nearly 3/4 have a car or a truck. 31% have 2 or more cars or trucks. Nearly 2/3 of the U.S. poor have cable or satellite television. Half have a personal computer. 1 in 7 have 2 or more computers. More than half of poor families with children have a video game system such as Xbox or PlayStation. 43% have internet access, and 43% have widescreen plasma LCD TVs. Now, I don't want you to think that I'm ridiculing or I'm targeting or speaking bad about the poor in our country. But you know what? We are materially blessed in this nation. We are materially blessed. But yet, we seem to be very spiritually impoverished. Why? Why? Why do we live in a society, in a country where we have so much material abundance, but yet we're miserable? Or we're unsatisfied? We're not content. I wonder why we have that problem. I wonder if it could be for the lack of gratitude for what we have. A long time ago, there was a man by the name of Ignatius. He made this statement: "In the light of the divine goodness, it seems to me, though others may think differently, that ingratitude is the most abominable of sins, and that it should be detested in the sight of our Creator and Lord by all His creatures who are capable of enjoying His divine and everlasting glory." Christians, what do we have that we have to suffer through worry and covetousness? Why do we do that? Also, a man that lived a few years later than Ignatius, but a name familiar to hopefully all Americans still, Benjamin Franklin. He made this statement: "Most people return small favors, acknowledge medium ones, and repay greater ones with ingratitude." Ingratitude. How often do we express gratitude? Or is it, I'm entitled to this, I earned this, this is mine, you can't take this away? We may have worked and earned something. I'm not dismissing that. What I'm asking the question is, when's the last time we expressed gratitude for what we have or what we've been given? Or we just caught up wishing for more. I want more. I want more, more, more. That is not going to satisfy. And as we grow older in life, there's truths that we understand or we should understand. Now, some people deny these truths to themselves, but as we get older, certain truths settle in around us, and it gets harder and harder to deny. One of these truths is we will not be satisfied by material things forever. Eventually, the things that we have are going to be owned by somebody else. They're either going to be either owned by strangers, friends or family, or the trash. It's going to be owned by somebody else. We're not going to own it forever. Now, we may intellectually know that, but as we get older and our bodies wear out and we start to settle into the fact that, we're not going to be on this world much longer, that truth settles in. But let me challenge you to think about this. What if it would have been different if we recognized, or how different would it be if we recognized that truth years ago? And when we realized that truth years ago, how could we have changed our life years ago? What could we have done through the course of those years differently than just accumulate a bunch of stuff? Have we given much thought about that? Now, I was walking through Barberton Hospital not too long ago, and it's a beautiful hospital. I mean, the facilities are great, and the people there are very nice and all that. I mean, I know there's, obviously a lot of sadness and sickness, but as I was walking through the hallways there, I noticed a lot of names up there that are maybe in bronze or in plaques and things like that. And I'm sure you go to any building, a major public building, you'll see that kind of thing. And I see people's names. And you know what? I look at their names and I have no idea who they are. I have no idea what they valued. I have no idea what they stood for. They're complete strangers to me. Sometimes we spend a lot of our efforts trying to leave a name for ourselves somewhere. But it's not going to last forever. It's not going to last forever. It's foolish to think that it will. When I was going through, my father passed away fairly recently, and when I was going through his personal records, his files, his sermons, things like that, it's very easy to see the things that my dad valued. He loved his family. He loved the church. He loved his friends. He's concerned about the lost. And he loved the Lord. Those things, you can see very quickly if you would go through my father's records. I hope when my children go through my records, those 5 things, I hope they'll be able to see them easily. I hope they don't have to go on some kind of fact-finding expedition to try to figure that out. But the beauty about those kinds of things that we treasure, people, relationships, God, those are sustained. They're sustained. Now, go back to Jesus for a moment. I want to close out and read a poem to you about Jesus. And I want you to think about the idea he didn't have material abundance. And this is a poem. It's called He Was a Man by a person by the name of Bon Ritter. It was read by Johnny Cash in 1963. He said that a year ago it was the most popular thing that he ever did on his TV show, I guess he's talking about. And he had so many requests that he actually recorded. And this is the way this poem goes. Here is a man who was born in a small village, the son of a peasant woman. He grew up in another small village until he reached the age of 30. He worked as a carpenter. Then for 3 years he was a traveling minister, but he never traveled more than 200 miles from where he was born, and where he did go he usually walked. He never held political office. He never wrote a book, never bought a home, never had a family, never went to college, and he never set foot inside a big city. Yes, here was a man. Though he never did one of the things usually associated with greatness, he had no credentials but himself. He had nothing to do with this world, except through the divine purpose that brought him to this world. While he was still a young man, the tide of popular opinion turned against him. Most of his friends ran away. One of them denied him, and one of them betrayed him and turned him over to his enemies. Then he went through the mockery of a trial and was nailed to a cross between 2 thieves. And even while he was dying, his executioners gambled for the only piece of property that he had in this world, and that was his robe. When he was dead, he was taken down from the cross and laid in a borrowed grave, provided by compassionate friends. More than 19 centuries have come and gone, and today he is the centerpiece of the human race, our leader in the column to human destiny. I think I'm well within the mark when I say that of all the armies that ever marched, all the navies that have ever sailed the seas, of all the legislative bodies that have ever sat, and all the kings that have ever reigned, all of them put together have not affected the life of man on this earth so powerfully as that one solitary life. Here was a man. 50 years have gone by since Johnny Cash recorded that. It still hasn't changed. Jesus was able to change the world. He didn't have a great abundance of possessions. You want to change the world? Follow his example. Thanks for watching our program. Before we close our program today, we'd like to take a moment and review this roadmap to heaven with you since the matter is so serious. There are many incorrect set of directions out there, and sadly, so many people are following them. For example, some people have been given wrong turns. They believe things such as faith only, works only, or grace only. Or some attempt to change the order of the turns, being baptized before they even believe. Some people fail to realize what point they are on the map. Don't even open their Bibles yet, and they think they're saved already. As a person travels in a car or takes a hike, it has to follow the proper directions, so we must follow the proper directions to heaven. Let's take a look at the directions on our roadmap to heaven here. You have to look at these passages in your Bible for yourself. We'll just list the steps, the turns on the way. First is to believe or to have faith. And then number 2, to repent, to turn away from sin. Number 3 is to confess that Jesus is the Son of God. Number 4 is immersion, or to be baptized, which is a burial in water to have your sins washed away. And then you're added to the church by the Lord, not by a group of people, or not by giving some kind of testimonial experience or things like that. And then once you're added, you need to serve and worship the Lord faithfully all the days of your life. And the key word's faithfully. You don't waver. And that's very important. We need to keep in mind, too, that in Noah's day there was a big flood, and only people in the ark were saved from the flood. The same is true today. There is no salvation outside the Lord's church. Where are you on the roadmap to heaven? Thanks for watching our program. Please let us know if we can assist you with further information for your journey.